should have some music. Yay! Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. I'm seeing all these people coming in. I just want to say hi. Everyone can say hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, hi, hi. We just, if you want to scroll and see who's in the space, there's a whole bunch of us presenting. So as people are coming in, I just want to say hi, 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 hi. Yay! Wow, we have a lot of attention. Woohoo! Yay! Hello, everyone. Hello, 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 hello. There's about 20 of you in the space here about to listen to us speak. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to share a little intro and then give it away to the MFA students. These students are in one of my classes, which actually starts right now, and it's Equity and Diversity in the Theater Classroom. And we have been exploring multiple subjects surrounding equity and diversity, one of them being anti-racist pedagogy, anti-racist theater practices. So I challenged the students to come up with anti-racist theater practices to present at this conference within 3 weeks of starting classes. So they literally started classes and I was like, pow, you're doing this in 3 weeks. And I'm really excited, and you can see everyone's faces. They're like, yeah, she did that. But the presentations are incredible. What these MFA students have come up with, I'm like, yes, thank you so much. And it just goes to show you that when you want to do this kind of work, you can do it. It doesn't take years to do it. You have to just start doing it. And that's part of anti-racist pedagogy, is that you have to start doing the work. You have to commit to the work on a regular basis, on a consistent basis. So with that said, we have 4 groups that are going to be presenting. They're all going to be presenting on different topics, and you will get to get a feeling of all of them. After each group has finished presenting, the next group will come, the next group, the next group. And then at the end, we will have questions and answers. If any of you have questions and answers throughout their presentation and you want to put it in the Q&A, you can. We won't address those until afterwards. But please know that you can address and put questions there. You can also send little cheers to our panelists as well. Some of the panelists that are presenting today, this is the first time presenting at a conference or a symposium. And so I think that's also exciting, because I remember the first time that I had to do this, it was very nervous, very, very nervous. And so I just want to share that, because it's important to acknowledge that. And again, I'm just really excited. I'm excited to be able to hear their work and see their work and have them share their work and talk about this work with all of you who are in the space. And I'm very grateful that at 6:30 on a Tuesday, you've all decided to come and join us. So with that said, I'm going to turn my camera off, and those not presenting are going to turn their cameras off. And the first group is going to do a little skit, but I'll just give it over to them and see what they want to share with you. Because it's theater, we can do skits.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Yvette L. Bishop.
Hi, I'm Mary Frances Candies.
My name is Thomas Shavir.
And I'll give a little introduction. So as Dr. Seacray said, it's new times. And as we navigate these new times, there are a lot of new terms coming up, and it takes a lot of work. And wouldn't it be nice if there was somewhere you could go where you could just have someone help you navigate this new world and package it up and help you understand how to find your way? What if such a place existed? Well, we're going to help you see what that would be like. Okay, let's go. Hello. Welcome to the Sustainable Gift Shop. If you'd like, you can sign in on our guest book and don't forget to add your pronouns.
Oh my God, thank you so much. My pronouns are she, her, hers. What are yours?
Mine are she, her, hers. And welcome to our shop. It's here on the land of the Tongva people in the heart of the Los Angeles, California. Where are you from? Do you know what land you grew up on?
Yeah, I'm from Louisiana, home of the Homa people. Okay, so I've heard your store has everything. I'm so excited to be here. I run the local theater in my town and everyone knows me. And I posted the black square and I bought all the books, how to be an anti-racist, I'm still here, Black dignity in a world made for whiteness, me and white supremacy, white fragility, why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. Now I need to read them, but what else do I need? It feels like my followers need more from me.
Well, yes, it would be good for you to actually read the books. You may actually also want to listen to some podcasts and begin your anti-racist training. Maybe even add some BIPOC plays to your season. BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Okay, well, you might want to do some readings, but one step at a time. You are showing you care to learn, to listen. You've identified a need, and you have come to the right place. Do you have an EDI statement?
No, I don't have a UTI.
Okay, no. An EDI statement. Okay, Thomas, can you bring out a few EDI statements?
Okay, one sec.
No.
No, an equity, diversity, and inclusivity statement. We have samples, and we can help you create one.
Okay, we have a few we can show you. First, let's read the Geffen Playhouse. Okay, in recognition of the National Examination of Systemic Racism and Injustices, we at the Geffen Playhouse commit to continued analysis and expansion of our own institutional practices in order to be part of the solution. Our vision for the Geffen is that people of all races, faiths, sexual orientations, abilities, genders, and backgrounds find it an easily accessible and highly relevant source of art that reflects the dynamic human experience and galvanizes a more equitable and vibrant community. Whew. In adopting this statement, we are amplifying our strategic and ongoing commitment to improving and increasing the cultural diversity, equity, and inclusion of our audiences, staff, artists, board, and programming.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I don't know about that one, Thomas. Blah, blah, blah. I think we can do better.
You're right. That one was a lot of performative allyship. I must have put it in the wrong pile. This one provides a more genuine approach. This is the Woolly Mammoth Theater. Okay. We are a radically inclusive community across race, ethnicity, nationality, age, gender identity, sexual orientation, physical ability, socioeconomic background, and political viewpoint, in which all are encouraged to exchange free ideas and reach for new understanding. Read more about Woolly's stance on the issues affecting our world today and how we are actively engaged in struggling against oppressive systems. Okay, so can you see the difference between the two?
Yeah, the woolly mammoth one sounds more proactive.
Exactly. And the Woolly Mammoth has more resources on their website explaining how they will follow through with their mission.
Ooh, they also have a new Latinx artistic director, Maria Manuela Goyanes, and a strong female leadership team at the helm. Yeah, go ladies. But I just thought of another one. Baltimore Center Stage has also knocked it out of the park with their social accountability letter to the community. Can you pull up a link to their page, Thomas?
Yes, here we are. Okay, so as you can see, I'm not going to read everything, but you can go through some of the things they have. Social accountability, update. They talk about being proactively dissatisfied as a springboard for moving forward, ongoing learning. They break down anti-racist theater training with Nicole Brewer and some of the staff training, bystander intervention, restorative mindset, and restorative response, on and on. Strategies for dreaming and shaping liberty future. As you see here, all kinds of resources and day-to-day applicable ways to approach it, decentralizing power, equitable hiring practices, so on and so forth. And a great example about how to keep this work going. You don't have to have a message tied up in a perfect bow.
That's amazing. I love how many resources it includes for everyone.
But if you're still figuring out what you would like to accomplish, you can be transparent about that. Here's what the theater department at LMU in Los Angeles is stating. We, faculty and staff of the LMU Theater Arts Department, recognize our unintended role in perpetuating systems of oppression and inequity in our department. We are in the process of reimagining what we teach and how we teach and create. We hope to make definitive strides towards fixing a broken system and preventing further injustice and moving toward equitable practices.
And you can also find a link to BIPOC plays and creatives and an inclusivity statement found within their manifesto. LMU is doing the work.
These are great. So can I buy one?
No, you have to make one yourself.
Yeah, you have to adapt your own. So what are your own beliefs?
Is there anything you stand behind or support specifically as it relates to anti-racist theatrical practices, spaces, any changes you want to see in your theater?
I mean, I support my followers. Like, is that what you mean?
Well, possibly. First, you need to look inside, figure out what you support and believe. Then your EDI statement will come naturally. It's kind of like a manifesto for equity, diversity, and inclusion in your life.
Yeah. You know what? It is. And let me see exactly. You know what you might want to do? You might want to look closer to home and see if your theater administration is representative of that community. And we're going to go in deep here. There's a lot of work to do. You can start by researching some anti-racist theater practices. Nicole Brewer has been interviewed on a few podcasts. She works in that field.
Yeah, she was mentioned on the website. You showed us Thomas. Okay, so I've been wondering, what exactly is anti-racist?
Okay, the National Action Committee on the Status of Women International Perspectives. Women in Global Solidarity defines it as an active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies and practices and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equitably.
Okay. I mean, that sounds cool. I want to do that.
That's a belief right there.
Well, there you go. So can you see how anti-racist theater work encompasses every aspect of your theater? It's not just about changing a few things. You need to completely revamp the structures that your theater operates under.
Okay. I think I can do this. I need to bring this to my board and get them on board. So where else can I go to learn more about this?
Well, there are different places you can go. If you go to howlround.com, you can find some really great reading material there about what's going on with anti-racism in our theater community. And there's also some great stuff on americantheater.org. And you also have to do the work for yourself and find resources that connect to you. You have to put yourself in touch with what's actually going on in our country.
Exactly, and we'll be here for you if you need help. The work is best done with the community. You can also follow anti-racist theaters or theater artists on Facebook or Instagram to widen your community.
Okay. I think I know what to do. Oh, my theater also does workshops with a local middle school. So is anti-racism something that I can explore with these students, or is it more of a like only for adults kind of?
Not only for adults. Racism is persistent for everyone in our country, no matter what age. Theater can be a great way to explore the constructs of race in a safer environment.
Okay, well, this is a whole new world for me, but I'm doing some Googling and I found this Equity Literacy Institute. It looks like they offer some professional development for teachers. I think I'm going to sign up for one of their workshops. I think it would be helpful for my students.
Look at you.
Fantastic. Yes, they're wonderful. It's equityliteracy.org, run by Paul Gorski. I actually took one of their teaching racial justice in K through 12 school seminars for the work I do with high school students, and the work is constant. The work will keep going. There's also artequity.org. They'll be holding an everyday justice anti-racism as daily practice workshop in March. You may want to check that out. It's on Zoom. The beauty of what's happening right now is that we're all a work in progress. Feel free to stop in any time. We're always here. We're always working.
I love this place. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. I'll be back soon.
Woo! Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, we got to use theater to get through some of these things. So thank you so much. We have a second group that is going to be presenting. And so I want to give the floor to them. But thank you so much. I hope that just that little skit was incredibly informative for all of you, because there is, you know, there's a starting point. There's a way, you know, you got to start somewhere else. You got to start somewhere in order to do the work. And I think that in about 10 minutes, you just got a whole lot of information. So I can't wait. So with that, our second group is going to be presenting. So I'm going to give the floor to them.
Hey, everybody. I'm Megan. And
Hi.
we have two other panelists with us.
Hi, I'm Yael.
I'm Macy.
And I want to start this off by saying that this is a work in progress, and we're still working on terminology, sensitivity towards this project and anti-racist practices in theater and theater pedagogy. So Macy, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or did I pretty much, and Yael as well?
No, that's perfect. You know, we are taking this course because we are here to learn, and we hope to educate ourselves and in the future educate any students that we are lucky enough to educate. And I think that if anything is said that causes offense, we apologize, and we would love for you to tell us.
Okay. So what we've done is that the three of us have created a PowerPoint for you. The first half is going to be about, because theater pedagogy really is sort of a performance within itself, really. I mean, it's a ritual, it's happening in the classroom. And then Macy's going to tie it to theater, and she's going to give you some great resources to refer to. So without further ado, let me pull up the PowerPoint. And bear with me, I've got to see if the technology is going to work through this. Okay, can you all see that? Okay. I want to use slideshow. Okay, so approaches to anti-racist practices. White privilege education then and now. Why are we whitewashing the truth? Let's think about K through 12 and how it impacts learning right to the moment the students walk into your classroom. So let's see if I can get to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so change starts with personal reflection. Let's look at diversity in your previous education and start to think about that and let the wheels turn. Whitewashing was happening before we even realized it. Did we have a diverse group of students in your K through 12 class? How were you taught history in K through 12 classroom? And we're going to talk about the warm, fuzzy version in history class. We will uncover the truth and what needs to change. And we even need to go deeper. How were you taught history in school? In K through 12, who was teaching you? Did you cover diverse material in history, which included diverse people? Did you ever question your education before coming to Loyola Marymount University? Why? Why not? So, outdated teachings and concepts remain even in fairly recent classrooms. It hasn't been that long ago that we were learning slavery is over, so racism no longer exists. We have a whole month dedicated to Black history. We teach our students about Martin Luther King. But in this presentation, we're specifically focusing on, we had the first Thanksgiving dinner with the Indians, actually Native Americans, which solved everything. So have things really changed? In a sense, teaching has shifted from being sage on the stage to guide on the side sort of teaching, but have our teaching and the way of learning also changed as well, and what we're teaching and the material we're teaching our students in the classroom. For Confucius says, he who learns but does not think is lost. He who thinks but does not learn is in great danger. And keep in mind to keep change is a constant, keep evolving, keep learning, keep growing. Always keep in mind the individual, your beliefs, attitudes, and actions. Interpersonal, your public expression, slurs and biases, hateful words and actions. The institutional, discriminatory treatments and unfair policies of biased practices in your own school, work system. And structural, white privilege and BIPOC disadvantages. And without further ado, Yael is going to take over from this point. I will pass the baton to her. Yael, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry.
You are welcome.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
So we are here to relearn our history to become much more inclusive. As you can see by this slide, not so inclusive. By now, most of us have heard the story of Thanksgiving about how the Pilgrims came to America on the ship called the Mayflower, and that when they arrived upon the shores, they met the Indians and they made friends and they had feasts, and this feast was called Thanksgiving, and we've been celebrating it ever since. Well, that's completely whitewashing and negating the inclusivity. It's basically a myth to create it to be a much more palpable narrative that we as a nation are founded on these values of gratitude, kindness, and sharing. It was actually a PR stunt that was created in 1863 by Abraham Lincoln, as he wanted to establish Thanksgiving as a national holiday. He felt that it hopefully would unite the United States during the Civil War. Most of the traditions that we have today come from that time period. The turkey and pumpkin pie were popular in 1863, not in 1621. The buckle hats that we've come to know were actually created in the 19th century by an artist thinking that it would give more of an upstanding perspective to the settlers, and then they were renamed into the Pilgrims. So the story was centered around values that our country is based upon. The Pilgrims were cast as the first Americans boldly taming the wilderness, when in fact it wasn't a wilderness that the settlers came to. It was a land, it was a village of the Wampanoag Nation, and the Wampanoag Nation had been here for thousands upon thousands of years. And the Wampanoag Nation had been doing trading with different Europeans over a few centuries. In fact, it was the Europeans during this trading time that wiped out 2/3 of the Wampanoag Nation in 1616. And one of the Wampanoag leaders, Usemaquan, was quite worried about this invasion from a neighboring tribe called the Narragansett tribe, who was actually untouched by the disease. So when the Mayflower descended upon the shores, Usemaquan saw an opportunity. He thought he would give the area where the 2/3 of the Wampanoags had died to the settlers. The people that were on the Mayflower were English, and they belonged to the Church of England. For the Christian values and Christianity was the religion of the time in England, but the settlers believed that the church had strayed from Christian values. So these separatists left England, went to Holland, and began their own beliefs and practices. But after a while, they eventually went to North America to build a society based on their version of Christianity. So the settlers arrived in November during winter, and about 100 people stepped onto the shores of the Wampanoag Nation. The settlers were weak from this journey because they were unprepared for their new life in this new land. So what did these new Christians do? Well, they stole food from the Wampanoag stockpiles, and they robbed their graves of jewelry and other valuable items. It's way to start with those good Christian values. I mean, during the winter, the settlers were dying every day of starvation and illness, and the settlers, like the Wampanoag, feared that their weakness would invite an attack. And the settlers took drastic measures. They decided that they were going to drag their sick from the bed and prop them up against trees, holding on to their bayonets and guns. That way that they would look like they were a strong society and stave off any possible attack. Well, sometime during March, Samoset, who was a native man, walked into the settlers' camp, and Samoset, who was a leader from Maine and spoke English, he was staying with the Wampanoag Nation. And here he was wanting to meet these settlers and introduce new ways of possibly being and existing to his new neighbors. He wanted to share with them new ways of how to plant and thrive within this community. At this point, John Carver, who was the new governor of Plymouth, sat down with Usamakwan, the great leader of the Wampanoag tribe, whose title at that time was Masiot, which means great leader. And during their meeting, they shared a ceremonial drink, and they agreed to terms of always meeting in peace and to defend each other, even if they were under attack. The treaty was signed, and it was a sacred treaty. Usamakwan sent men named Quantum to stay with the settlers, who would help teach them how to thrive during this time, showing them how to plant crops. And after a few months, there was a bountiful harvest, and that was in 1621. In fact, the settlers were so excited about their bountiful harvest that they were shooting off guns in celebration. And when the Wampanoags heard this, they were in fear. They thought perhaps something was going on. So they went there with 90 people to see what was happening. And there they discovered that the settlers were in utter reverence and joy. And they decided to come together. And as there was not enough food, the Native Americans, the Wampanoags, decided that they would bring forward to the table deer that they had captured and other vegetables. And this is the true part of our nation, the Wampanoag Nation and the settlers coming together. And as you can see by this map, we have unfortunately eradicated the different Native Americans, the Narragansett, the Wampanoag, that are on the East Coast, the Pequot, Mohegan. And we have completely taken that out of our educational system. We still have a lot of work to do and developing language so that we can so that we can actually include and stop sugarcoating our history and to begin acknowledging the Indigenous people and their values of how they have contributed to all of us. Thank you.
So very well put. And I must say, I was a 32-year-old woman, and it was this past week that I learned so many of those facts. And I'm here to talk about the unlearning of a whitewashed history. So, myths oversimplify complex stories. This is a scary truth, especially when communication is central in how we live. As we've witnessed throughout this presentation, the ways in which history is taught today are changing. Facts pertaining to the first Thanksgiving are more easily accessible to children through new platforms. We trust that by communicating through new platforms, these facts, children will be able to understand the truth and the effects of history. We will hopefully be educating a future generation who will be ready to have a conversation on the difficult topics, not brush them aside or silence their victims. But history we may have been taught. We can start by recalling upon the memories of creating hand turkeys and sporting Indian headbands to learn about a wonderful meal that brought complete and total peace to the indigenous tribes and the colonists. We can decide that even this memory is part of the problem. By admitting this, we can begin to rework what has been taught to us, acknowledging and furthermore recognizing reality versus falsehood. We can choose to highlight and uplift the indigenous voice. And what American roots run deeper than indigenous stories. Yet, what American stories have been more mistold and silenced than those of Native Americans? We can begin to see and respect the importance of storytelling to the Native American culture, the passing down of knowledge and tales. We can choose to honor this oratory tradition. And what better place to uplift the voice of Native American storytelling than in the world of theater? Theater, a mirror holding up the reflection of our own realities. In theater, there is power. In theater, there is a voice. In theater, there is a chance of change and a chance of hope. And right now, we ask you to just silently think of how many Indigenous playwrights you can name in this moment. If we cannot name any, we have a lot of work to do. How can we choose today to amplify the voices of the individuals that have been stifled for so long? How do we find the correlation between the whitewashed history we've been taught and our inability to recognize the importance of the Native American history and voice? If we were able to name 10 playwrights, do we know anything about the playwrights themselves? Do we only know the words they've put on paper? Do we understand the meaning of their stories? Do we understand their importance? If we can name 20, it's a nice start. And yes, I said start because it's a solid beginning to a long journey ahead. One of my favorite Indigenous playwrights is Larissa Fasthorse. And to quote her, "The important work happens when you leave the theater. The play is just beginning and then everything else happens after." Larissa Fasthorse spoke these words about her play, The Thanksgiving Play, when it was in production at Playwrights Horizon in New York City. She said that as we Americans have very little access to the true history of this country, it's been intentionally erased from our educational system and from popular culture. And so we challenge ourselves today to be members of the rise of the honest reality. The brutal truth of the history of Thanksgiving is unsettling. It is a story of displacement, of fear, and to this day, silencing. This is just one example of one event and how the history of one group has been whitewashed. Today, the three of us ask ourselves and you to utilize the power of theater as we know it to help give time, to give awareness to, and importance to the stories of the Indigenous people of this land. We challenge you to be an active listener, an observer, and uplifter of the Indigenous people, the Indigenous voice, and the Indigenous history. We can strip away the whitewashed version of history as we know it, and we can use the theater as a space for creating, empowering, and recognizing the truth. These are only a few playwrights that you see on the screen, Indigenous playwrights, and an anthology. And we ask that you please do your best to research as many as you can and to also learn who they are as people. Thank you.
Thank you, Macy and Yale. We would like to thank and Daphne and credit our work to Daphne, inspired by Daphne. And we want to close this by honoring the land and giving thanks to the tribes of Southern California, Chumash, Tongva, and Kish. You can find out more than native land you are sitting on at nativeland.california. Did I pronounce those names correctly, the tribal names? Excellent. And this concludes our presentation.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was wonderful and incredibly informative. And I hope it was informative for everyone who is here with us. Again, there's just like our presenters just shared, there's so many stories that are erased, so many stories that aren't told, so many histories that aren't taught. And theater is one of the most powerful tools to be able to do this. But then how do you do this correctly, right? And Megan just did something really beautiful. She said, did I pronounce that correctly? Right? Did I pronounce someone's name correctly? Because the way that we pronounce people's names is the starting point. It is how we start engaging people in these conversations and making sure that people are not erased and making sure people are being seen. But with that also comes language. And so I think it's really important that we talk about language and how do we use language in our classrooms, especially our theater classrooms, but I'm sure that this can apply to multiple other classes. So with that said, I'm going to hand it off to our next group of presenters and make sure that they're the ones with the cameras on and everyone else will turn their cameras off so that we can focus on them. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Some fantastic Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Fantastic presentations here. My name is Garrett Camilleri, and my fellow classmates and presenters are Amanda Holloman and Amber Bryce. And today we've got a short presentation for you when we'll be discussing ways to build an anti-racist classroom through the lens of language, like Professor Seacray said, and how we use it. It's a huge topic, and we only have a very short amount of time here. So we'll just start by addressing it with some of our particular group's questions and regarding language, as well as some specific examples that really relate to just the theater arts. And lastly, we'll leave you with sort of a proactive activity that you could do in your classrooms for any educators that may be listening or observing tonight. Also, just let everyone know that this is by no means what we're saying rules or definitive information here. This is a huge work in progress, and this is just our findings and the research that we've done here. We definitely are encouraging continuing exploration of the topic, and that's what we're also doing on our end. So I'm just going to pass it over to Amber now.
Thank you so much, Garrett. Yes, language is so universal. So we felt like it was best to cover it, or the tip of the iceberg. There's so much stuff to discuss with language, especially anti-racist language in the classroom and in rehearsal spaces. So some questions, general questions came up for us in our research. So that'll be addressed, through resources and articles that we looked up. But also my fellow classmate Amanda will kind of tie into some examples of that. And as Garrett mentioned, an activity. So what are those questions? What are the questions that came up for us? So here are the questions: the why, the how, and the what. Why is practicing anti-racist language in educational and performance spaces important? How can we practice anti-racist language in these spaces? And what does the practice of anti-racist language in these spaces look like? The first question: why is practicing anti-racist language in educational and performance spaces important? So it deconstructs the normalization of microaggressions. It recognizes and dismantles white supremacist practices, and it creates a safe space for the BIPOC community to feel comfortable to express their POV and thought process. Sorry, got cut off. And over here, I have from the article, I really found this article helpful. It's from the language series that explores anti-racist teachings. And it's the principles of engaging in anti-racist language teaching. And one that really stood out to me that kind of ties in with our next question is shift your listening practices to document, build on, and extend the existing linguistic repertoire of your students. Yeah, and a question that I had to ask myself was, okay, what is anti-racist language? I know kind of what anti-racist, what anti-racism is, and so I kind of found this definition: language that supports the expression of ideas that racial groups are equals and do not need developing and supporting policies that reduce racial inequity. So that practice kind of ties into this next question, or next question that popped up. How can we begin to practice anti-racist language in these spaces? So we know why it's important. We've done our research, but now how do we start? How do we begin? Where do we go from there, right? These are some things that came up for us. Educating yourselves on ourselves in the constant evolving language. As we all know, it changes every day, the language and the demographic trends in the US, finding ways to have an open and honest dialogue about social and racial injustices. And to tie it in with the first part, according to Nelson Flores, Assistant Professor of Educational Linguistics, recognizing and treating all language as emergent, fluent, and constantly in flux. And I thought it would be really good to include a quote from American author Ibram X. Kendi, and he is the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. And it says the good news is that racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. Can be a racist 1 minute and an anti-racist the next. What we say about race, what we do about race in each moment determines what, not who we are. So why it's important, how do we begin to practice it, and what does the practice of anti-racist language in these spaces look like? So, first off, I found these from articles that I thought were just so amazing. And the first one is assessing the common phrases you use and diagnosing whether they carry any racist meaning. And I got that from the article, We Commit to an Anti-Racist Stage Management Education article. Number 2, ask yourselves about any oppressed identities that you could be excluding or unintentionally harming. Remove this language from your vocabulary and speak up as an ally when you hear racist language. It's from the same article, which awesome article. We have a Google Doc that we'll post at the end of our presentation that has all of those resources. Eliminating racist phrases in these spaces. So I have an example of some phrases that even I was like, wait, what? I need to check my vocabulary. I need to check my phrases. And that is from the article, Phrases That We Should Work to Eliminate in the Rehearsal Room. And the last one, ask people to offer specific suggestions for how to do things differently when offering criticism. And that is from a recent article that we were assigned by Dr. Sucre, the characteristics of white supremacy culture. And I thought it'd be really fitting to put in a quote from Nigerian American writer Ijoma Iluo. And it says, the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it's the only way forward. Ijoma Iluo. And she is the author of So You Want to Talk About Race. So some examples, and Amanda will further kind of tie into what that looks like coming up in a theater classroom. Phrases that we should work to eliminate in a rehearsal room. So instead of saying cracking the whip and whip them into shape, you can say getting things in order. We know that whips were used as punishment to enslave African Americans. And so the trauma or painful history that brings up. So yes, you can say getting things into order. Instead of saying, let's have a powwow, to kind of demean the significance of powwows in native culture, you can say, let's gather or circle up. Instead of saying no can do or long time no see, which stems from racial bigotry of making fun of Native Asian people in a comical way, you can say, no, it's been a while. So those are just some general questions that came up for us, some examples, but I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to kind of show us what that looks like in a theater classroom as well as a classroom.
Thank you, Amber. So, how do we address or eliminate racist language that we encounter in materials in our classroom or rehearsal spaces? Now, this is an approach coming from the perspective of performing arts classrooms, but the principles will really translate to any discipline. As educators, we will encounter material that includes racist language. This could show up as a racial slur used in a script, or a racist concept in a book of theory, or both. This racist language can be very harmful. In a 2017 article, authors Mihaela Popa-Wyatt and Jeremy L. Wyatt explain slurs can harm and degrade their targets, making them feel humiliated, dehumanized, disempowered, and silenced. So in order to support an anti-racist classroom or rehearsal space, it's important that we do not ignore or avoid the language, but address it head on. According to the Anti-Defamation League, when people or institutions treat lower level biased attitudes or language as acceptable with silence or non-action, this bias keeps moving up the period to acts of discrimination and possibly violence. So the first thing to consider when you're encountering this language in materials is, why are you using that material that contains the racist language? Is it required by your institution? If that's the case, it's important to share with your students that that's the reason that you're using it, but ensure to them that just because it's required material does not mean they can't approach it with a critical gaze and question its value. Again, address the language head on and explain that it's derogatory or harmful. And if you selected the material, explain to your students why you've selected this material and what your goals are in using it. Be sure to listen to how your students are responding to the language and ask what they need surrounding the use of the language and the discussion. It's imperative to notify your students in advance that they're going to have this language in the materials that they're reading. So really, when it comes to addressing these issues, the discussion is key. Call out the language and its harm. Address and question its history, its context, its intention, and the impact of the language. So based on what we know about the harm that can be inflicted by racist language, I suggest that it should not be spoken in the classroom. But again, it has to be discussed. So whether it's a class where the language will be talked about and discussed, read aloud or performed, have the discussion, and then offer an alternative to speaking the language aloud. If it's a performance-based or acting class, discuss what the intention of the language is, and if cutting it entirely will not achieve the same emotional stakes or impact for your students, replace the language with language that's not racist. So as theater practitioners, we'll also encounter racist language in plays that we will be producing. So a couple ways to look at this. If the play is in the public domain, such as Shakespeare, for example, I suggest change it. Have a discussion with the actors and the creative team and crew and replace the language or cut it entirely. And the great thing is there are sources out there to help you with this. For example, Lavinia Jadwani, an Asian American theater artist and educator, has created a fantastic Google Doc that's available to the public that specifically addresses anti-Black language in Shakespeare. She offers specific examples of replacement words that scan the same or cuts to any particular language, depending on the particular language that's used. And that'll be included in the Google Doc that we share with you at the end here. But if the play is not in the public domain, and therefore the language cannot be changed for the use of a production, consider why this is a story you want to tell. Why this play now, and what is the context of the racist language that's being used? How do we honor the playwright's intention and work while retaining a commitment to anti-racist language in the classroom and not harming our students with this language? BIPOC artists may have embraced or reclaimed certain language, and we are not here to police the work or the choices of these artists. We're here to reduce the harm in our students. So again, have the discussion about the language, and this discussion should ideally be had with the entire creative team and the actors and everyone who's going to be working on a production. And then place rules around the use of the language. For example, if there is a racial slur used in a play, one suggestion is to clearly state that the language is only to be spoken by the actor playing the character that uses the language in the script. So no other people on the crew or the production team or the creative team will be speaking this language, only that actor when they are rehearsing in the rehearsal space. So finally, I just want to close with the thought that one of our roles as anti-racist educators is not to commit further harm to our students. We will make mistakes, but acknowledging the racist language when it's used and listening to the voices in the room is vital to reducing harm and educating our students and ourselves. And with that, I will pass this along to Garrett.
You're muted, Garrett.
Thank you. All right, so thank you, Amber and Amanda. We only have a few minutes left in our presentation, and so instead of doing the activity, I just want to share it with you. We wanted to leave you all with some sort of proactive way that you can address language in your classrooms if there's any educators in the audience today. And so this addressed language and also the implicit bias that we have about certain titles that we assign people in society. And the activity is called First Thoughts, and I want to give credit to Mary Mokihan from the Technological University of Dublin. The whole giant document that I found this activity in, it's like 59-page resource manual that'll be in the chat below once we're done. But basically, it's pretty straightforward. The goals of the exercise, the activity, is to explore the idea that we have implicit bias from the words that we use, even down to the little things like titles and what we call each other, as well as to understand that everyone has prejudices and to encourage discussion around these prejudices. The instructions are as followed. Basically, a facilitator calls out a selection of words that are predetermined, and this could be varying depending on the classroom or depending what you want to choose. And you ask the group of students that you have to write down the very first word that comes to mind once you hear this particular word. Ideally, this is under the umbrella of the larger conversation that you're having that day, whether that's about diversity or anti-racist practices or basically just prejudices. And then when the facilitator has finished calling out these words and everyone's written them down, you break out into think, pair, share groups, and students can discuss there. And then the third step is just basically coming together and sharing final like, notice, wonders, and how does our language really create these prejudices that we see day to day. The resources that you need are pretty straightforward. It's a piece of paper and a pen. Optional resources are a projector, just in case you want to put that up in front of the classroom so that everyone sees the words. And some lists of potential words that we want to offer up are things like doctor, police officer, teacher, cook. If you're working in the theater arts, director, actor, set designer. You can even go like the word governor or president or things like that. And lastly here, I'm going to put into the chat our Google resources that we used here between the three of us. And of course, we want to thank you all for listening and tuning in.
Thank you. And now it's getting late, but we have one more presentation that we would love for all of you to stay and to be a part of, because it's really important as we're closing it off. Once you have, you're talking about language, but let's also talk about casting. Let's also talk about intersectionality and how all of this really intersects and affects many things than just one thing. And so when you're having these discussions of race and education, how does that affect everything and the intersectionality that comes with that? So with that, I will leave you with our last group. And then of course, we're open for questions right afterwards, and you can ask any of our panelists questions after this last group. All right, thank you.
Hello all, thank you for being here. My name is Kalina Stell.
And I'm Ann James.
And we are going to be talking about some things that unfortunately are really relevant in today's education system for BIPOC students. The reality of race in theater education.
Yeah, and before we begin, we just have to give a little content warning that some of this information might be a little charged for you. So we just ask you to breathe and accept what we're sharing with you as truth from the experiences of BIPOC individuals in the university complex. So without further ado, I will go ahead and begin. Ready, Kalina?
Let's do it.
All right. So, why is predominantly white university casting a racist enterprise? We asked Dr. Secre if we could focus in on casting practices in university systems because we felt like there was something rotten in the system when it comes to BIPOC individuals in our universities. So we started with these questions, and basically it starts with the lack of education around this area. So we asked ourselves questions like, Who creates and designs theater training programs?
Mhm. We also thought about, which students are actually let into these programs, and then how many of them are there?
What material is being introduced, referenced, taught, and who gets to decide on that material?
Yeah. What does the faculty look like at that university or that program?
What will a BIPOC student's resume look like when they graduate versus a white student's resume? And we're also talking about intersectionality as well on top of this BIPOC experience. So, one step behind, how casting in university programs keeps BIPOC out. If you were talking about the whole system of theater within universities. So we looked at 3 different universities through this article, where we will quote the author in a moment, but we looked at Oslo, I think that's the way you say it, Repertory Theater, and that's Florida State University's in-house theater. We looked at Ithaca College, and the article also looks at Rutgers, which is where the writer is from. And if you could just glance over how the casting happens and how directors are selected, for instance, at Ithaca College, theater arts showed that only 3 current faculty members out of 35 are not white. And this article was written in 2019, so it's not like it was written in 1965. It's written recent. And just to give you another example, there's an image here that shows how many people from the different BIPOC communities were asked to direct shows at this university, at Rutgers, and you can see the numbers are shocking. So that in itself is a whoa moment.
Then, we asked the question, why aren't BIPOC university students given more lead roles? There are several reasons why, but some of them that really stand out. Number one, the lack of diversity in material. There seems to be this canon, everyone knows the canon that gets taught over and over and over again. And I thought about, my personal undergraduate experience, and I was introduced to 0 BIPOC playwrights or plays, which was really shocking and frightening. It wasn't until I did research on my own that I realized, oh, this stuff is out there, and it should be. So lack of exposure to BIPOC plays. Also, white male playwrights are just preferred. They are the go-to, and they get cast that way at universities, unfortunately.
Yes. This was from an article in the American Theater Magazine, which is kind of shocking, but I'll just read it for you. More broadly, Black students also note a tendency toward Eurocentric and white authored programming and standards, a scarcity of teachers of color, and tokenization. In a letter addressed to Florida State University's Oslo Conservatory, signed by many students and alumni, students recount a leader of the theater parading 5 Black students out at an event saying, "Look, there's 5 of them," as a self-congratulatory presentation of the program's diversity. So this is a big problem in our system. And, education is very expensive.
Yes.
Who can afford attending a conservatory? Education for BIPOC students is often devalued, and showcases favor white students. So we all know that when students are coming to a point where they're about to graduate, in some of the larger universities, they are given a showcase, and agents, producers are invited, but very few of those agents and producers look toward the BIPOC students. And yet they have paid the same tuition to get their education.
To get uneducated. So now they're graduating with resumes that don't compare to their fellow students. And how can we expect them, to book gigs when you need a resume to get the gig, but you don't have anything on your resume due to lack of education? It's sad. And you paid all that money for it too, which sucks.
Yeah. So this is a comment. This is written by a gentleman, Jalen Livingston. And it's from an article called The Miseducation of Black Students, Why Equity in Theater Education is Important. It was rare for a teacher to feel like they knew me enough to give me the extra detailed feedback they might give white students. And in the classes where that was the case, I was left uneducated. So this is the woman who wrote, Katie Doe is the woman who wrote the article about the lack of directors and how university departments aren't casting Black students. And she says this from her university experience. When you take a note in acting class, you're constantly asked, can you take notes well? Or you're told you have to take the note better. Now, she adds, leaders need to take our notes because we spend a lot of money taking notes from them and came out, especially the BIPOC students, especially our Black students, with a lot of trauma. And that is unfortunately what is happening. I promise you, we have some solutions. It's not all bad news.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So then switching to BIPOC educators and the extra labor that they have to do, unpaid, I should say. There was a beautiful quote. I'm just going to read it. Thank you to the Black professors and directors who take extra time with kids who don't come from privileged backgrounds, who may have been exposed to the craft of performing at a later age, and most importantly, who are still trying to figure out their identity in a sea of white expectation that only wants to see them in a raisin in the sun.
Yeah, we're moving into education. We have educators within our midst in this meeting that are dealing with using extra time that they have, sometimes using some of their money to help BIPOC students, using their energy and ideas to navigate the system in order to be fair to the BIPOC students that they know and love. And then obviously love. They're giving their love, and some to the detriment of their personal relationships because they're required to give so much to these students in systems that are lacking.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So these are the things that you wouldn't know unless you were a BIPOC educator. These are the unpaid requirements that are expected of a BIPOC educator. And some of it is very erasing. For instance, did you know that BIPOC educators sometimes have to teach other educators in the department about institutional, cultural, racial, and intersectional bias?
Yes, they get looked over for tenure due to racism in the leadership of the department.
The professors are sometimes asked or expected to serve on a large number of committees because they're BIPOC and they want their point of view on these committees.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes often expected to find cast members for BIPOC plays outside of the department.
Right. So if you want to offer a play, like a Black play in your department, as a BIPOC educator, to give your students an opportunity to work on something, if there aren't enough cast members to go around, then you might have to go to the football team, the basketball team, social justice department, the English department to find actors to be in the play in order for it to go on. And sometimes you can't find them, and then therefore you don't get to do that show for those very students you wanted to help. So what do we do about it?
So some solutions that we have for PWUs. Number one, expand the notion of the canon. There is more than Shakespeare out there. Really do your research and be open to diversifying what you want to put on, what you want your students to study. Give opportunity for everybody.
Include current students of color in more programming decisions. You know, these decisions about a season for university happen behind closed walls and faculty meetings. It would be so much more meaningful to reach out to the students of color and see what plays they're reading. I guarantee you they're reading something that the faculty probably hasn't been exposed to or heard of, and it would be great to give them an opportunity to be heard.
Diversify theater seasons. And that doesn't just include, you know, including Black plays or LGBTQ plus plays or Native American plays, but it also just means in the plays that you want to do that are normally all white, diversify that cast. Majority of the plays, it's not even written in there that they have to be white. It's just the norm. So break those norms. Yeah.
Sometimes white is the default, and we have to stop making that the default.
Yes.
Where characters that aren't related to anyone else, you know, even if they are, we have rainbow families now. We can make this happen. Hire guest artists of color and involve them before the production. So this means don't just bring in a guest artist of color or an an LGBTQ director or someone with a disability that wants to be a director, that is a director. Don't just bring them in for the project. Invite them into workshops and pay them to come the semester before so that they get to know the student body and the student body gets to know them and create bonds for after school, for after graduation, so that your BIPOC students are connected to professionals in the industry before they graduate. I know I'm talking to you like you're on the board of a university, but you know, that's kind of, you might be one day. You very well might be one day. So also you can hire, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, other than just hiring them, you know, hire them again. Don't just hire them once and bring them in. Oh, we did a show last semester, or remember we did that show last year and we brought in so-and-so. Continue to bring them in, continue to offer those jobs, those opportunities. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, and hire directors of color for more than the Black plays. Yes. You know, I mean, directors who are starting out, emerging directors, they need to get their teeth into all different types of theater. Absurdist theater, theater of the oppressed, theater, you know, we need to stop, siloing our directors that we want to promote. We have to stop giving them only plays that look like them.
Yeah. Ease the burden of BIPOC educators in the department. Take some of that work that we had on the previous slide away off of their shoulders, you know, just because that starts with bringing more into your program. But if there are only a handful of BIPOC faculty, it's not their job to educate others. They have a full-time job. It's everyone's job to go out and do the work ourselves and to want to do the work ourselves.
Yes, and train and hire more designers and stage managers of color as well. You know, there seems to be a whole anti-racist movement in the stage management field right now, where stage managers of color are coming together and meeting with one another to make sure that they can uplift the BIPOC actors that they have in their cast. So the work is being done, and it's not that difficult to find out where the help is needed. So we encourage you. We know this wasn't exactly an easy presentation, but it's a true presentation. And we bring it to you from our hearts. So thank you for listening. Make changes when you can.
Mm-hmm. we will all benefit from PYUs being fair for everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Yay! Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I welcome all of our panelists to turn their cameras on so that we're all present here, since we're in the space so that you can see all of us. And we would love to open it up for questions. Like, do you have any specific questions for any of the groups? Do you have anything specific that you want to share? You could also share an experience. We have the questions there. You can put it also in the chat. Any of those things, we would love to hear from you. In the meantime, I'm going to ask our presenters a question while y'all are processing a possible question for them. And my question goes to all of you. What made y'all choose the topics that you picked? Because I didn't give you a topic, you picked it. I just said you have to present. And so you got together in groups, and in your groups, you came to a consensus as a group as to what to present. So I'd love for the space, those of you attending the space and listening, to hear why did these educators, because they're all educators, they're getting an MFA in performance pedagogy, they're entering our classes in the next year, or some of them are in our classes teaching already. And so, you know, why did you pick these topics? I'd love to hear from anyone in the groups. Yes, Yael, please feel free.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, I'm currently working with kindergarteners as well as third graders. I have an opportunity to work in a pod situation. And in working with them and being around them, I wanted to know what their educational system was like in comparison to mine, especially of the fact that majority of the homes that I'm going to, I'm seeing Black Lives Matter signs everywhere. And I'm like, well, that's wonderful that these children are touting these signs, but I really wanted to know, what does that mean for them? So I've been having these conversations. What are you guys learning about? What does that mean, Black Lives Matter? And having open dialogue. And then I was with them over Thanksgiving, and I started to look at the curriculum because I'm doing tutoring with them. And I was very happy to see that there was more inclusivity that was involved within their education right now. But I then did some research, and I found that that's something that has just happened in the past like year or two. And then just in having conversation with my cohorts, Megan and Macy, and we just started to just kind of spitball, and that's why we landed on Thanksgiving. So that's what I have to say.
Nice. Anyone else want to share why they picked the topic? Yes, go for it.
For me, it was personal experience, and coming from an undergraduate that was only a few years ago, all of this was still pretty fresh for me. So when Ann and I were talking about it and it came up, I was like, yes, perfect. Let's talk about it. On top of now that I want to transition into becoming an educator, I just really want to be that educator that I would have loved to have. The one that can, you know, point me in all different directions and give me a plethora of playwrights and plays. And I never had that. So I think it's important. And yeah, it was really just on my heart, and it was fresh. And I was like, that's it, Anne, let's do it.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Amanda, because I know that you've been very passionate about language, and you've been really thinking about this for a while. Like this, you know, this is not new for you. So Amanda, would you share why your group decided to focus on what they did?
Absolutely. For me, it was a question that I had most of all that I needed to answer for myself, and as an educator and as a director in theater. And I thought that if it's a question I have, it's got to be a question some other people have too. And how do we approach it in the most in the best possible way, and what are the best practices to look at? And so I talked about that with my group, and we all kind of realized that language is so important, and there's so much embedded in language across the board, that it was something that we wanted to dive a little deeper into.
Yeah. And this, what is that? I think that's me. But I was just going to say, oh, that was freaky. You're absolutely right, because language, so much of it gives, microaggressions are so embedded in language, right? And we enter these spaces, and a aggression could be, you know, anything, and it can hurt someone very deeply. And sometimes we don't even know it. Sometimes it's not intentional. Sometimes it is intentional, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just lack of knowledge or lack of not knowing or lack of whatever your education was. And all of you have touched upon these issues. And so to, you know, to look at that. Um, I love to hear from our first group. What made y'all want to do a skit? Because, you know, that switched it up. That was different. And I loved it because, you know, it reminds me, yes, we're theater. We don't have to just do a presentation. We can just do a skit. So what made you all want to do a skit to present this information, resources as well?
Yeah, I think we started with an open and honest conversation like many of the groups did. And I think it started with just kind of poking fun at Instagram allyship and then spun out farther from there into a more, you know, genuine integrative space. And I think we just had so much fun having a conversation with each other that we wanted to keep it like that. We selfishly, we wanted to keep it as a conversation rather than a formal presentation.
And
Yeah.
that's also
And
how
oh,
we dismantle white supremacy and white supremacist practices, presenting information in various ways, not the way that people might expect us to present information. And to remind people that there are different ways that people gather information, that you don't always have to do it a specific way because that's the norm. That's what is going to be X, Y, and Z. And I'll tell you that as a theater practitioner, I remember going to this one conference one time and I was just like, I want to do a workshop, but everyone else is doing papers. And like, my research is workshops. It's very like practitioner oriented. Boy, I do not feel like I fit in here. Right. But I was like, you know what? I'm still going to do my workshop. And the people who came were like, you're doing what? You're having us get up? We're not just listening to a paper. And I was like, no, we're going to participate. And, you know, but again, I think that's the beauty of theater and using theater as a practitioner's tool to educate on so many different topics. And so I'm still waiting to see if anyone in the audience has any questions for our incredible group of panelists. Any questions? Any questions? I don't see any questions. So in the meantime, what I'll ask is, do any of you have questions for each other and each other's group? For those of you still in attendance, you couldn't see the chat inside the webinar, but the support that this group was giving to each other was absolutely beautiful. And it was really lovely to see. So I'd love to know within the group, do y'all have questions for each other's? Let's see.
I just have a comment about the group that talked about the myth of Thanksgiving and lifting up our Native playwrights. I want that anthology immediately. I mean, if I weren't in this conference, I would be ordering it right now. And there you go. And
there's a couple others that we can definitely share with you.
Great. And I just wondered how you came to understanding that, like when you were doing the research and you were unpacking it, what were your thoughts? What was going on in your mind when you were unpacking that information about the truth of Thanksgiving?
I'll speak to that. I mean, I know that Macy and Megan, I'm sure you have your voice. I was furious. I was delighted to see that this is now what's being put into the educational system. Again, I'm working with third graders and kindergartners. And honestly, it was looking at the work that they were getting assigned where I was like, wait, what? Wait a minute, what? And it was through an organization called Brain Pop that had these resources. And then I started to do investigation, but I was personally humiliated that I didn't know. I have Native American friends and I've talked about the indigenous communities that I've gone and I visited in my lifetime, but I was mortified that here I am, this woman of privilege, and that I didn't know half of what these kids were learning. So I was thrilled to like dive into the research and to see.
We have a question which really sort of, it jumps off what you just mentioned, which looks at what specific projects is anyone working on right now, or what organizations, and some of you already mentioned this, like, are there any specific organizations that you want to share, that you want to acknowledge or amplify? I'm going to amplify Breath of Fire, which is a Latina theater ensemble in South California. They're doing incredible work. They're doing readings on a consistent basis. A lot of their members just presented work at the Frida Kahlo 10-minute play, and they just presented a whole series of monologues written about the COVID experience, and really written by multiple people. Anyone could submit their monologue, and they presented those monologues, incredibly powerful, of the experiences with COVID, especially looking at the Latinx community and beyond. So I want to give a shout out to Breath of Fire and all the work that they're doing. But are there other organizations that you have encountered so far that you didn't mention in this presentation that maybe some of you are working with, or that you want to amplify or want to work with in the future?
Well, I'll just start. It is my company, so I'm kind of spoiling it.
Go for it. Go for it. Put yourself out there and put it out there. Put it out there. Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I have a company called Intimacy Coordinators of Color, and I am the first Black queer woman to own an intimacy company. And what we're trying to do is branch out and open up the definition of intimacy to include racial intimacy, cultural intimacy, ability intimacy, maturity and intimacy, so that we don't just focus on sexual content, but that we take the whole person in their intersectionality into consideration when we're working on scenes that involve intimacy. So that's Intimacy Coordinators of Color, and it's been a pleasure so far.
And Anne, you've been presenting in multiple spaces, and so it's such an honor to have you here, and for us to learn from each other. It's such a beautiful thing. Mary Frances just wrote in the chat for everyone who's still listening, art equity, and this was for anyone, attendees and panelists, anyone should be able to access this. They have some great workshops available that are definitely, there's one specifically that looks at anti-racism on a daily practice and how to put that into your own life. And so I highly recommend, highly recommend this. Let me see what we have here. Oh yes, this is going to be recorded. I'm just looking at the sign and everything that we have here. We have about a couple more minutes. Anything else that y'all would want to share? Any words of wisdom for anyone who's listening? Yes, go for it. Macy, yeah.
Yes, it's just something that the name is completely, I cannot remember it, but Yael had found a series of talks that we listened to for this particular project. And I'm hoping that she can give us the name of the series because they were amazing. So I just wanted to, I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, Yael, but I feel like, it was definitely such a find, that was happening in this time frame. And I would highly suggest, if we can find the name of it, to share it with you guys.
And also, Anne just put in the chat for everyone, the Fire This Time Festival has been producing specifically Black plays for over almost 13 years. I had the privilege of working with them a couple times when I was in New York. And this year they're collaborating with the CTG, Center Theater Group. Yeah. And they're working together. And it's so beautiful. I was talking to one of the founders of the Fire This Time like 2 months ago. And it was just so exciting to hear that they're collaborating. And it's possible because of Zoom. Like the fact that you're now able to have, this theater festival that takes place in New York, collaborating with a huge theater institution here in California is absolutely incredible. And so there's this sort of blessing that comes out of COVID and blessing of us being on Zoom and sort of collaborating and producing and doing plays on Zoom, is that now you can have this sort of like cross-country collaboration with artists, and you can bring all sorts of artists. And I think that that's a really good reminder to sort of end and conclude and bring us all sort of together. Feel free to answer Macy's question and put it in the chat for everyone. But what I was going to share is, even when we're able to take the vaccine, even when theaters go back to their spaces and we're able to be producing plays in theater houses and have audiences that are not having to be 6 feet apart and all of that stuff, Zoom is still going to be there, and so we can still use that. We can still bring educators into our classes via Zoom. I was using that before we went online. I was bringing in educators from different parts of the country to teach a lesson through Zoom. Why not? We have the technology now that we can do that. People can still come and do workshops. We can do stage readings and cast people from all over because we now have sort of this accessibility. So I want to end on a high note that even if we are experiencing COVID and this world of theaters through Zoom, that this can apply to anyone. We can still bring in all sorts of different educators into our spaces even afterwards. So I just want to thank everyone. Thank you so much for being in the space. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. And just, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I highly suggest the panelists that you read the chat. Lots of people are sharing all of your lovely feedback to all of you. And so thank you for those in the space. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for the incredible panelists, I will see you all at 8:06, 8:06, 8:06, 8:06. All right, so I will see you all. Bye, bye, everyone. Bye. And a big shout out to Stephanie for being here late and organizing this incredible conference. Yay, Stephanie. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, bye, everyone. Bye, bye, bye.